The rain came down in silver sheets, heavy and cold, drumming against the rooftops of a quiet little American town. Street lights flickered through the storm, their glow distorted by the rain. At the end of a narrow lane, a small wooden house stood alone, its porch light barely cutting through the darkness. Inside, an old black woman sat by the window, wrapped in a faded quilt. Her name was Miss Loretta. 73 years had weathered her body, but her eyes, dark and deep, still held a quiet, unspent tenderness that life had long ago taught her to hide. Loretta hadn't spoken to anyone in days. Her husband had passed away a decade ago, her daughter had moved to the city and stopped calling, and the neighbors rarely visited anymore. She had grown used to the silence, though it still pressed on her like a weight she carried in her chest. The house smelled faintly of lavender and rain-soaked wood, the kind of scent that makes time feel slower. That night, she was sipping her tea and listening to the storm when a sudden knock broke through the rhythm of the rain. It was light at first, almost uncertain, but then came again. 3 small knocks. Loretta frowned. No one came by this late, especially not on a night like this. Her first thought was that it might be a trick, or one of those teenagers from down the road. But something about the knock, hesitant, almost afraid, made her pause. She rose slowly from her chair, her knees aching, and shuffled to the door. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice half lost in the rain. No answer. Just the sound of thunder and the distant rustle of trees. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorknob. Then came another knock. So soft it sounded more like a plea than a demand. With a small sigh, Loretta unlatched the door and opened it just a crack. What she saw made her heart tighten. A little boy stood on the porch, drenched from head to toe. His clothes were thin, his sneakers soaked through, and his hands trembled as he tried to shield his face from the rain. He couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old. His skin glistened dark under the porch light, and his big brown eyes were wide with fear and exhaustion. "Ma'am, I'm sorry," he stammered through chattering teeth. "I think I knocked on the wrong door." "Ma'am? What are you doing out here in this weather?" He shook his head, trying to explain, but his words tangled up between gasps. I was looking for my auntie's house. My mama, she said it was number 12, but I think I got lost." Loretta stepped out just enough to look beyond him. The street was empty, washed in the pale orange of the streetlights. No cars, no people, nothing but the relentless rain. "Where's your mama now?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. He lowered his gaze. "She went to work. She works nights." The small silence hung between them. Loretta felt her heart twist in a way it hadn't in years. The boy looked so cold, so fragile. His hair was plastered to his forehead, and his little hands shook as he clutched the strap of a worn backpack. Without thinking, she opened the door wider. "Get in here before you freeze." The boy hesitated, as if unsure he should trust her. But when another gust of wind blew through the street, he nodded and stepped inside. Water dripped from his clothes onto her wooden floor, but Loretta didn't care. She closed the door behind him, sealing out the storm. "Sit by the heater," she said, guiding him toward the small living room. "You'll catch your death if you stay like that." He obeyed quietly, sitting near the small electric heater as steam began to rise from his soaked clothes. Loretta fetched an old towel from the hallway and handed it to him. "Dry your face, baby." He took it, his eyes shy but grateful. "Thank you, ma'am." Loretta studied him as he rubbed his cheeks dry. There was something about him, something achingly familiar. Not his face exactly, but the way he held himself, the way he looked at the world with cautious hope, as if kindness was something he wasn't sure he deserved. "What's your name?" she asked gently. "Malik. My name is Malik." "Well, Malik," Loretta said, her voice warming, "looks like you knocked on the right door after all."
The rain softened as the night deepened, its rhythm steady and calm, like a lullaby for the lonely. Inside the small house, the old heater hummed and filled the air with gentle warmth. Malik sat cross-legged on a faded rug, clutching the towel to his chest as if afraid it might be taken away. His sneakers sat by the door, dripping onto a mat that had once been bright red but had long since faded to brown. Miss Loretta moved slowly through the kitchen, her slippers making a soft shuffle on the linoleum floor. She poured a bit of soup into a pot, a simple broth with carrots and rice, and turned the stove on low. The aroma began to spread through the house, and she caught herself humming a gospel tune she hadn't sung in years. Malik's eyes wandered across the room. He saw pictures on the wall, sepia-toned memories in crooked frames. A younger Loretta smiling beside a tall man in a church suit. A baby girl wrapped in pink blankets. And another photo of that same girl, now grown, wearing a graduation gown, her smile bright and proud. "Is that your family?" Malik asked quietly, his voice almost hesitant, as if speaking too loudly might break the spell of comfort in the room. Loretta turned, surprised. It had been a long time since anyone had asked her that. "Yes," she said, looking at the pictures. "That was my husband, Thomas. He passed some years ago. And that's my daughter, Denise. She lives out of town now." "Do you see her?" Malik asked. Loretta smiled, but her eyes betrayed a faint sadness. "Not as often as I'd like. Life keeps folks busy," she said. She stirred the soup again, watching the steam rise. "But she's a good girl, always was." Malik's eyes wandered across the room. He saw pictures on the wall, sepia-toned memories in crooked frames. A younger Loretta smiling beside a tall man in a church suit. A baby girl wrapped in pink blankets. And another photo of that same girl, now grown, wearing a graduation gown, her smile bright and proud. "Is that your family?" Malik asked quietly, his voice almost hesitant, as if speaking too loudly might break the spell of comfort in the room. Loretta turned, surprised. It had been a long time since anyone had asked her that. "Yes," she said, looking at the pictures. "That was my husband, Thomas. He passed some years ago. And that's my daughter, Denise. She lives out of town now." "Do you see her?" Loretta smiled, but her eyes betrayed a faint sadness. "Not as often as I'd like. Life keeps folks busy." She stirred the soup again, watching the steam rise. "But she's a good girl, always was." Malik nodded, staring at the pictures as if he could feel the warmth of those old smiles. Loretta carried a bowl of soup to him, setting it carefully on the low table. "Here," she said, "eat this before it gets cold." He looked at the bowl, his eyes wide. "You made this?" She laughed softly. "Child, it's just soup, nothing fancy." But Malik didn't pick up the spoon right away. He sat there, looking at the bowl as though it was something precious. "I haven't had hot food in a while. My mama, she works all night and sometimes we just eat cereal." Loretta felt a tug deep in her chest. "You must be hungry then," she said gently. "Go on." He took a careful spoonful, then another, faster this time. The warmth spread through him, loosening the tension in his small shoulders. Loretta sat across from him, watching quietly, her heart swelling in that old familiar way, the way it used to when Denise was little, when she'd fall asleep at the table with soup still on her spoon. When Malik finished, he looked up shyly. "Thank you. That was real good." "You're welcome," Loretta said softly. She collected the bowl and took it to the sink, but her hands lingered on the edge of the counter. She could feel something stirring in her, something she thought she'd buried. Care. The wind outside had died down, leaving only the steady drip of rain from the eaves. Loretta turned back toward the boy. "Your aunt, where does she live, do you know?" Malik frowned. "Mama said it's on Chestnut Street, number 12, but I walked a long way, and all the houses looked the same." Loretta nodded slowly. "Chestnut Street was 3 blocks over, too far for a child to walk alone in the storm." "You're not going back out there tonight," she said. "You'll stay here until morning. We can find your aunt's house when the sun comes up." Malik's eyes widened. "Really? You don't mind?" She smiled gently. "It's a big house for just one old lady. I could use the company." He hesitated, then whispered, "You're nice." Loretta chuckled under her breath. "Not always," she said, though her eyes softened. "But tonight, I'll try to be." She found a blanket and a small pillow and laid them on the couch. Malik curled up beneath the blanket, his eyelids heavy from warmth and exhaustion. As Loretta turned off the lamp, she heard his quiet voice in the dark. "Miss Loretta." "Yes, baby." "Thanks for not leaving me outside." The words were simple, but they struck her deep. She stood in the doorway for a long time after he fell asleep, listening to his soft breathing, the sound blending with the rain outside. For the first time in many years, her house didn't feel quite so empty. And though she couldn't explain why, Loretta knew that little boy hadn't knocked on her door by mistake. The morning light crept softly through the thin curtains, turning the room a pale gold. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean, the streets glistening, the trees dripping with dew, and the air thick with the smell of wet earth. Miss Loretta stood by the kitchen window, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. She watched as a small bird hopped along the railing outside, shaking rain from its feathers. Behind her, Malik stirred under the blanket. The boy blinked groggily, his small face half buried in the pillow. For a moment, he looked disoriented, like someone waking up from a dream, and then the memories of the night came back to him. The knock, the rain, the warmth. His eyes found Loretta standing near the window, and he smiled shyly. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice still raspy with sleep. "Mornin', baby," Loretta said with a small smile. "You sleep all right?" He nodded, sitting up slowly. His hair stuck up in uneven tufts, and the blanket was tangled around his legs. "It was warm," he said simply. "That's good?" Loretta set down her coffee and walked toward the stove. "You like pancakes?" Malik's head shot up, eyes bright. "Pancakes?" Loretta chuckled. "I'll take that as a yes." She began mixing batter in a bowl, her movements slow but sure. The scent of butter and vanilla filled the air, mingling with the faint trace of coffee. Malik sat on the edge of the couch, watching every motion with quiet fascination. It felt like something sacred, a morning that belonged to family, not strangers. He looked down at his hands. "My mama used to make pancakes on Sundays," he said softly. "But lately,
She's too tired. She works all weekend. Loretta glanced at him. She must be a hard-working woman. He nodded. She cleans offices downtown, sometimes 2 at a time. Loretta felt that familiar ache in her chest again, the kind born of understanding. She too had worked those long nights once upon a time, scrubbing floors and mopping hallways, her knees burning and her heart heavy with dreams she couldn't afford to chase. When the pancakes were done, she placed them in front of Malik, the butter melting over the golden surface, syrup dripping like honey. He didn't wait long before digging in. After each bite, he hummed softly, and Loretta couldn't help but laugh. "Slow down, boy, you'll choke." He grinned, mouth full. "They're so good." "Flattery'll get you more syrup," she teased, pouring another small drizzle over his plate. As he ate, Loretta sat across from him and studied his face. There was a fragility in his eyes that didn't belong to a child. She'd seen it before, on the faces of kids who'd grown up too fast, who'd had to learn the hard way that the world isn't always gentle. When he was done, Malik leaned back, satisfied. "Thank you, Miss Loretta," he said. "I'll help clean the dishes." Loretta chuckled. "Well, aren't you polite? Go on then." He carried his plate to the sink, carefully washing it with soap. His little hands worked clumsily, but with pride. Loretta watched him, her smile faint but warm. Once they were done, she went to find an old jacket that might fit him. "We'll go find your aunt's house now," she said. "It's just a few blocks over." Malik hesitated. "What if she's not home?" "She will be," Loretta said, though she wasn't entirely sure. They stepped outside together. The morning sun broke through the clouds, painting the puddles with streaks of light. The air was cool, the neighborhood quiet, except for the distant hum of a car engine and the bark of a dog. Malik walked beside her, holding the strap of his backpack. He looked so small against the wide street, but Loretta noticed how he walked with quiet determination, his chin slightly lifted, his steps steady. When they turned onto Chestnut Street, Loretta scanned the house numbers. 12 was a small blue house with a crooked mailbox and a yard full of wildflowers. She knocked gently, but no one answered. She tried again, harder this time. Still nothing. Malik's face fell. Maybe she went to work too. Loretta frowned, looking around. There were no cars in the driveway, no sign of life inside. "We'll wait a bit," she said softly. They sat on the porch steps. Loretta folded her hands in her lap, and Malik leaned against her arm. For a while, neither spoke. The world was quiet, except for the whisper of the breeze through the trees. After a long pause, Malik said, "You think I was really supposed to knock on your door last night?" Loretta turned to look at him, her eyes glistening with something gentle and unspoken. She said slowly, "Sometimes God sends us where we need to be, not where we planned to go." Malik thought about that for a while, his brow furrowing in concentration. Then a small smile spread across his face. "Then maybe he wanted me to meet you." Loretta's throat tightened, and she reached out to smooth his damp curls. Maybe he did. As the sun climbed higher, they waited. Two souls who had found each other in the storm, unsure of what came next, but no longer quite so alone.
An hour passed, and still no one came to the blue house on Chestnut Street. The sunlight had grown warmer, and the smell of damp grass rose around them. Malik sat with his backpack on his knees, tracing the pattern of the porch wood with his finger. Loretta could tell the hope was slowly draining from his little face. She knocked again, harder this time. The sound echoed faintly inside, swallowed by silence. No footsteps, no voices. Loretta pressed her ear against the door. "Nothing," she muttered. Malik looked up at her, worry settling in his small features. "Do you think something happened to my auntie?" Loretta straightened, her knees popping softly. "Maybe she just stepped out, baby. Some folks work early on Saturdays." "But she was supposed to be home," he whispered. His voice trembled slightly, though he tried to sound brave. "Mama said she always stays home on the weekends." Loretta looked around. The neighborhood felt still, too still. Most of the houses were quiet, blinds drawn, curtains fluttering faintly in the breeze. She sighed and sat back down on the porch step beside him. "Well, we'll figure it out. You said your mama works nights, right? Where does she work?" Malik frowned, thinking hard. "It's called, Linking Tower. It's a big building with glass everywhere. She cleans the offices." Loretta knew the place. A tall, shining building downtown, 20 floors high. She'd cleaned there herself once, back when her knees still worked right. "That's a long walk from here," she said softly. "No place for a little boy to go alone." "I can take the bus," he said quickly. Loretta smiled gently. "You even got bus money?" Malik looked down, shaking his head. "No, ma'am." "That's what I thought." She patted his hand. "Come on, child. You'll come back to my house for now. We'll call your mama when she gets home from work." He hesitated, torn between worry and relief. "What if she gets mad I went to the wrong house?" Loretta shook her head. "Ain't no mama in this world gonna stay mad when she knows her baby's safe." As they walked back, Malik carried his backpack carefully, his small frame dwarfed by the old jacket Loretta had lent him. The streets shimmered with sunlight now, puddles reflecting bits of blue sky. A pair of children zipped by on bikes, laughing, and for a moment Malik's face softened. When they reached Loretta's porch, she opened the door and motioned him inside. "Go wash up, baby. You've got dirt all over your hands." He obeyed, heading to the bathroom, while Loretta picked up the phone and dialed the number scribbled on the emergency contact card she'd found tucked into his backpack. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a tired female voice answered. "Hello?" Loretta cleared her throat. "Ma'am, my name's Loretta Harris. I've got your boy here, Malik. He came by my house last night during the storm. Seems he got turned around trying to find his auntie's place." There was a pause, followed by a rush of sound, relief, fear, gratitude all tangled together. "Oh, Lord. Thank you, ma'am. I've been worried sick. I told him to stay home, but I guess he wanted to surprise my sister. I just got off work. I can come right now." "No rush," Loretta said kindly. "He's safe. I'll fix him a sandwich. You take your time, honey." "Thank you," the woman said again, her voice cracking. "I'll be there in 30 minutes." Loretta hung up, a small smile touching her lips. She walked to the bathroom door and called out, "Your mama's on her way, baby." Malik poked his head out, eyes wide. "Is she?" "She sure is." A light bloomed across his face, a mixture of joy and relief that made him look younger, almost like the frightened child who'd shown up on her doorstep had been replaced by a boy full of hope. Loretta made him a sandwich, and he ate it eagerly while she sat across from him, sipping her tea. They talked about little things, his school, his friends, how much he loved basketball. Loretta listened, nodding along, though her eyes softened every time he mentioned his mama working late or being too tired to cook. Half an hour later, there was a knock on the door. Loretta rose, her heart lifting as she opened it. A woman stood there, drenched in sweat and rain from the long walk, her eyes red and weary. She was young, mid-30s maybe, with deep brown skin and tired, beautiful eyes that mirrored Malik's. When she saw him, she dropped to her knees and pulled him into her arms. "Malik!" she cried, clutching him tight. "Boy, don't you ever scare me like that again." "I'm sorry, Mama. I just wanted to see Auntie."
Loretta watched them silently, her throat tightening at the sight. The woman looked up then, her gaze meeting Loretta's. "Thank you, ma'am," she said softly. "I don't even know what to say." Loretta shook her head. "Ain't nothing to thank me for, child. He just needed a warm place to wait out the storm." The young mother smiled weakly. "Still, thank you." They stood there for a moment, three people bound by a night of rain and chance. When Loretta finally spoke again, her voice was low, almost tender. "You take care of him, you hear? He's a good boy. I know. He just misses company sometimes. It's been hard lately." Loretta nodded slowly. She understood without needing to ask more. As they turned to leave, Malik waved from the doorway. "Bye, Miss Loretta." She smiled, lifting her hand in return. "You stay out of trouble now." He grinned, his front tooth slightly chipped, his eyes bright. "I will." And then they were gone. The door closed and silence returned. Loretta stood there for a long time, her hand still resting on the doorknob, her heart both full and strangely hollow. The house felt quieter than before, but not in the same way. Something in her had shifted, as if the echo of that boy's laughter had left a warmth behind, a reminder that even the loneliest hearts can still be found in the dark.
The storm outside had quieted to a soft drizzle by the time the boy drifted into a half-sleep on the couch. A quilt, smelling faintly of lavender and thyme, rested over his shoulders. Miriam sat nearby, her knitting needles still in her lap, though she hadn't moved them in several minutes. Her gaze was fixed on the boy's face, soft, peaceful, trusting. She couldn't remember the last time she had seen such innocence up close. She had not realized until this very night how hollow her house had become. The laughter that once echoed in these walls had faded long ago, first when her husband passed, and then when her daughter, Elise, stopped calling. The silence afterward had been her punishment, or perhaps her refuge. But tonight, with this small stranger sleeping under her roof, the silence felt different. Not empty, but waiting. She stood quietly and went to the kitchen. The clock ticked, the storm whispered, and she began to make hot cocoa. Her hands moved automatically, pouring milk, sprinkling cinnamon, stirring until the surface shimmered. It was something she used to make for Elise when the world outside felt too big. Behind her, a soft voice said, "Smells good." She turned. The boy was awake now, rubbing his eyes. His clothes were still damp, his shoes placed neatly by the door where she'd left them to dry. "I thought you might be hungry," Miriam said gently. "There's some soup, too, if you'd like." The boy nodded, hesitant but grateful. "Thank you, ma'am." As he ate, Miriam watched him closely. He couldn't have been older than 8 or 9 years old. His curls were still wet, sticking to his forehead, and his hands trembled slightly as he held the spoon. Something in her chest tightened. "What's your name, child?" "Caleb?" "Caleb," she repeated, tasting the sound. "That's a strong name." He smiled faintly. "My mama says it means faithful." "Does she now?" He nodded, but looked down again, the smile fading. Miriam waited, letting the silence stretch like a bridge between them. Then he whispered, "She's at work. She works nights, sometimes late. I was supposed to stay at my aunt's, but I guess I took the wrong street." Miriam's throat caught. "And you were walking all this way alone?" He shrugged. "I thought I could find it. Then the rain came." She could hear the quiet shame in his voice, the same tone her daughter once had when she was small and had broken something precious. Miriam reached across the table and rested her wrinkled hand over his. His skin was small and warm and very alive. "Then you found the right door tonight," she said softly. He looked up startled, then smiled again, this time for real. Outside, the wind sighed through the trees. Inside, something fragile and long asleep began to stir in Miriam's heart. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a ghost haunting her own home. Caleb finished the soup, and she helped him make a small bed on the couch. As she tucked the quilt around him, he whispered, "You remind me of my grandma." Miriam froze. "Do I?" Caleb said, "She used to hum when it rained. It made me feel safe." Miriam stayed beside him long after he fell asleep, her fingers absently stroking the edge of the quilt. The rain had stopped completely now, but the sound of it lingered in her ears like a memory reborn. When she finally turned off the lamp, the old house didn't feel so empty anymore. It felt, for the first time in years, like a home waiting for morning.
The morning after the storm felt like the beginning of something sacred. The clouds had drifted away, leaving a pale blue sky stretched above the sleepy neighborhood. The scent of wet earth mixed with the faint aroma of coffee drifting from Marlene's kitchen. She moved slowly, her joints stiff but her spirit light. For the first time in years, she woke with a purpose, to make breakfast not just for herself, but for someone who made the house feel alive again. Eli sat at the kitchen table, his small legs swinging under the chair. His curly hair stuck out in every direction, and his eyes followed the steam rising from the grits Marlene set before him. He looked up at her, cautious but smiling. "You really don't mind me staying?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Marlene smiled softly, setting a plate of buttered toast beside him. "Mind? Baby, I prayed for peace for years. Maybe it didn't come the way I expected, but peace came knocking anyway." Eli giggled, his laughter filling the kitchen like sunlight spilling through cracked blinds. He began eating, slowly at first, then faster as his hunger took over. Marlene sat opposite him, watching. Her old clock ticked gently above him, marking the rhythm of two lives learning to move in step. When breakfast was done, Eli followed her to the small garden behind the house. The soil was still damp, the air rich with the scent of rain. "These flowers," Marlene said, crouching near the beds of faded roses. "They'd been waiting for someone to help me care for them." He crouched too, his fingers brushing the petals. "I can help," he said with a shy pride. "My mama used to have flowers like these." His words trailed off, and Marlene didn't press. Instead, she handed him a small trowel. "Then you'll know just what to do." They spent the morning planting, weeding, laughing. The boy hummed a tune under his breath, and Marlene found herself joining in, a gospel melody she hadn't sung in years. The rhythm carried them both, lifting something heavy from her chest. By noon, they sat on the porch steps, sipping sweet tea. A soft wind stirred the trees, scattering a few lingering raindrops. Eli leaned his head against her shoulder. "Miss Marlene, do you think God sent me here?" Marlene looked out across her little yard, her heart swelling with something she hadn't felt in a long time: gratitude. "I think," she said gently, "God sent us to each other." In the distance, church bells began to ring, their sound carrying through the still air. For the first time in years, Marlene thought she might go back. Not because she was lonely, but because she had something to be thankful for again. The storm had come and gone, but what it left behind was something far greater than destruction. It left two lost souls who, by accident or grace, had found home in each other.
The days that followed settled into a quiet rhythm. Mornings began with the smell of pancakes and laughter in the kitchen. Afternoons were for reading old storybooks on the porch. Evenings ended with whispered prayers beside a small bedside lamp. For Marlene, time seemed to soften. Her house, once a tomb of silence, now pulsed with warmth. The sound of footsteps, humming, and gentle breathing that lulled her to sleep. Eli had changed too. His once nervous glances grew steadier. His shoulders relaxed, and the dark circles beneath his eyes faded. But sometimes, in the stillness between moments, Marlene caught him staring out the window toward the road, as if waiting for something, or someone. One evening, as the sky blushed with the last light of day, a knock came at the door. It was firm, but hesitant. Marlene's heart skipped. Eli froze, his little hands clutching the edge of the table. She opened the door to find a woman standing there, soaked in tears and exhaustion, her coat clinging to her like it was holding her together. Her face was young, worn, familiar in a way that spoke of pain. "Please," the woman said, her voice trembling, "I'm looking for my boy. He's small, curly hair. His name's Eli." The child's head lifted at the sound of his name. "Mama?" The woman fell to her knees, arms wide. Eli ran to her, burying his face in her neck as she sobbed into his hair. Marlene stood in the doorway, her hands trembling against the frame. The world seemed to tilt between joy and heartbreak. "I didn't mean to lose him," the woman said, her words pouring out through tears. "We had nowhere to go after they evicted us. I left him at the shelter to look for work. When I came back, he was gone." Marlene's throat tightened. She knelt beside them, her voice low and gentle. "He's been safe here. He's a good boy. You raised him right." The woman looked up, gratitude flooding her eyes. "You must be an angel," she whispered. Marlene laughed softly, shaking her head. "Just an old lady who forgot how to stop caring." They stayed together that night, three souls bound by rain, loss, and grace. Marlene cooked one last supper, the table lit by a single candle. As they ate, the house hummed with quiet peace. Eli reached across the table and took both women's hands. "Maybe we can all stay together," he said. Neither woman answered right away. But when Marlene looked into the mother's eyes, she saw something familiar. A reflection of her younger self, struggling, proud, and desperate to give her child a better life. Weeks later, the little house felt different again. The mother had found a job at a nearby diner, and she and Eli stayed in the guest room for a while. Every morning, before heading out, she hugged Marlene and said, "Thank you for saving us." But Marlene knew the truth. They had saved her too. On a bright Sunday morning, Marlene watched Eli run through the yard, his laughter echoing beneath the magnolia tree. The woman stood beside her, smiling. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked quietly. Marlene nodded. "Every day. That storm didn't just knock on my door. It knocked on my heart." The two women stood in silence, the wind carrying the scent of new blossoms. The world was still imperfect, full of loss, struggle, and unanswered prayers, but somehow, in this tiny corner of it, something holy had bloomed. And somewhere inside her,
Marlene understood that love doesn't always arrive when we plan for it. Sometimes it comes disguised as a lost child, a storm, or a knock at the wrong door, and stays just long enough to remind us that grace never forgets an address.